The storm howled outside, rattling the windows of the small seaside village. Mira pulled her cloak tighter around her shoulders as she trudged through the downpour, clutching the lantern in her hand. The eerie glow of the abandoned alchemist's workshop loomed ahead, its silhouette a dark blot against the crashing waves beyond. She had heard whispers of this place from the elders, an old lab left untouched since the disappearance of its owner. Curiosity, as always, had gotten the better of her. Pushing the creaking door open, Mira stepped inside, her boots echoing against the wooden floor. The scent of salt and old parchment filled the air, and her lantern cast flickering shadows across the shelves lined with dusty vials and crumbling scrolls. She ran her fingers along the edge of a workbench, noting the intricate diagrams of alchemical formulas etched into the wood. One object in particular caught her eye. A small glass vial sat at the center of the table, its liquid contents glowing faintly even in the dim light. Genesis, she read aloud, the word etched in elegant script along the side. Next to it lay a tattered notebook, its pages filled with notes on interspecies bonds and the fusion of human and beast kind essences. Her heart raced with excitement. This was unlike anything she had ever studied. Myra's hand hesitated above the vial. The notes suggested that activating Genesis required a precise sequence of steps, combining a few drops with her own energy. Despite the warnings scrawled in the margins, her curiosity burned too brightly to ignore. She prepared the vial, whispering the incantations from the notebook as she followed the instructions. The liquid shimmered, and a warm light began to pulse from within. Before she could fully process what was happening, the light expanded, enveloping the room in a golden glow. A gust of wind surged through the workshop, extinguishing her lantern. Mira stumbled back, shielding her eyes as the light condensed into a swirling portal at the center of the room. Her breath caught in her throat as a figure emerged from the vortex. He was tall, his frame broad and imposing, with golden eyes that glowed like embers. Stripes marked his skin, and his features bore the unmistakable traits of a tigerkin. His ears twitched as he stepped forward, his powerful presence filling the room. For a moment, the only sound was the steady drip of water from Myra's soaked cloak. The beastkin's gaze locked onto Mira, his expression a mixture of curiosity and caution. You, he rumbled, his voice deep and resonant. You've activated Genesis. Myra's throat went dry, but she managed to find her voice. What are you? He tilted his head slightly, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. I am Kieran, an alpha of the Tigerkin, and you, human, have bound us through an ancient ritual. Myra's heart pounded. Bound us? What do you mean? Kieran stepped closer, his movements fluid and deliberate. Genesis is a relic of my people, meant to bridge the divide between our species. By activating it, you've initiated a pact, a connection meant to explore compatibility between human and beastkin. His eyes softened, though his voice remained firm. And now, our fates are entwined. Mira took a step back, her mind racing. She had heard of the beastkin, mysterious beings who lived beyond the human world, but she never imagined she would encounter one, let alone be tied to one through some ancient ritual. I didn't mean to. I was just curious, she stammered. Kieran's gaze didn't waver. Curiosity or not, the bond has been formed. And now, it must be fulfilled. A tense silence settled between them, broken only by the distant sound of thunder. Myra's pulse quickened as she processed his words. Fulfilled how? His golden eyes flickered, his expression unreadable. By exploring the connection we now share. Genesis responds to both our essences, and only through mutual understanding can its purpose be realized. The weight of his words hung heavy in the air. Mira couldn't deny the strange pull she felt toward him, an inexplicable warmth that seemed to stir deep within her. Despite her fear, there was an undeniable sense of intrigue, an urge to understand this bond, to unravel the mysteries of Genesis. Kieran extended a hand, his claws retracting as a gesture of trust. I will not force you, Mira, but if we are to make sense of this, we must work together. Mira hesitated, her eyes searching his for any sign of deception. She found none. Tentatively, she placed her hand in his, surprised by the warmth of his touch. The connection sent a gentle pulse of energy through her, a sensation both unfamiliar and comforting. "I'll help you," she said quietly. "But I need to know everything about this bond and what it means." Kieran nodded, his grip firm but reassuring. "Then we begin together." As the storm raged outside, the two stood in silent understanding. The air between them was charged with unspoken tension, a mixture of fear and anticipation. For Mira, this was the start of an uncharted journey, one that would test her limits and challenge everything she thought she knew about the world and herself. The glow of Genesis began to fade, but the connection it had forged remained. Mira couldn't shake the feeling that her life had changed irreversibly, and as she looked into Kieran's eyes, she knew this was only the beginning. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the air crisp and the skies a pale blue. Mira stood at the edge of the cliff overlooking the sea, her mind a whirlwind of questions. Kieran had been quiet since their initial exchange, his gaze often fixed on the horizon, as if searching for something beyond the waves. Despite his stoic demeanor, Mira could sense the weight he carried, responsibility, perhaps, or an unspoken burden tied to the Genesis ritual. She turned to glance at him. His imposing figure stood out against the rocky landscape, his striped skin catching the morning light. There was a tension in his posture, a readiness that reminded her of a predator waiting to strike. Yet, when his eyes met hers, there was a softness, a quiet understanding that put her at ease. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice breaking the silence between them. Kieran's gaze lingered on her for a moment before he spoke. "The bond we share is still new, fragile. We must explore its depths if we are to understand it fully." He stepped closer, his presence both comforting and overwhelming. "Genesis is more than a simple ritual. It's a test, a way to determine if our worlds can truly coexist." Mira folded her arms, trying to suppress the nervous energy building within her. "And how exactly do we do that?" Kieran's lips curved into a faint smile. "Through trust, shared experience, and connection." His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Mira felt her cheeks warm, but she held his gaze. There was a vulnerability in his expression, a silent plea for her to accept this strange new reality. Despite her apprehension, she nodded. "All right, where do we start?" Without a word, Kieran extended his hand, guiding her down a narrow path that wound along the cliffside. They descended into a secluded cove where the waves lapped gently against the shore. The air here felt different, charged with an almost tangible energy. Kieran stopped near the water's edge, his eyes scanning the horizon. "This place is sacred to my people," he said quietly. "It's where many come to strengthen their bonds." Mira looked around, taking in the beauty of the cove. The sunlight danced on the water surface, casting shimmering patterns across the rocks. She felt a strange sense of calm, as if the very air was urging her to let go of her doubts. Kieran turned to face her, his expression serious. "Close your eyes." She hesitated, but eventually complied, shutting out the world around her. The sound of the waves grew louder, the rhythm steady and soothing. She felt Kieran's hand gently take hers, his touch sending a spark of warmth through her. "Focus on your breath," he murmured. "Feel the connection between us." Mira did as he instructed, her breathing slowing as she tuned into the sensations coursing through her. The warmth of his hand, the steady pulse of his energy, it all blended together, creating a sense of unity she hadn't expected. She felt his presence more acutely, as if their very essences were beginning to sync. After a moment, she opened her eyes, and their gazes locked. The air between them felt charged, the unspoken bond drawing them closer. Kieran's free hand came up to gently brush a strand of hair from her face, his touch lingering longer than necessary. Myra's breath hitched, her heart pounding in her chest. "Do you feel it?" he asked softly. She nodded, unable to find her voice. The connection was undeniable, an invisible thread pulling them together. Kieran's eyes searched hers, his expression unreadable. Slowly, he leaned in, his movements deliberate, giving her every chance to pull away. But Mira didn't move. Instead, she closed the remaining distance, their lips meeting in a tentative, electric kiss. The world seemed to fade around them, leaving only the two of them and the steady rhythm of their connection. Kieran's hand slid to the small of her back, pulling her closer as the kiss deepened. Myra's fingers found their way to his chest, her touch exploring the hard planes of muscle beneath his skin. There was a primal intensity to the moment, a shared hunger that neither could deny. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing heavily, their faces mere inches apart. Kieran rested his forehead against hers, his voice low and rough. "This is just the beginning." Mira swallowed hard, her mind racing. The kiss had left her shaken, but it also solidified something within her, a resolve to see this through, no matter where it led. "I'm ready," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Kieran pulled back slightly, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "Good, because there's much more to discover." The rest of the day passed in a blur as Kieran guided Mira through a series of exercises meant to strengthen their bond. They practiced synchronizing their movements, attuning their senses to one another, and sharing moments of quiet introspection. With each passing hour, Mira felt their connection grow stronger, the initial awkwardness giving way to a sense of harmony. As the sun began to set, casting a warm golden glow over the cove, Mira sat beside Kieran on a large rock overlooking the water. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with the unspoken understanding that had developed over the course of the day. Kieran broke the silence, his voice thoughtful. "You're stronger than I expected." Mira raised an eyebrow, a hint of a smile on her lips. "Is that supposed to be a compliment?" He chuckled, the sound low and rich. "It is. You've adapted quickly to something most would fear." She looked out at the horizon, her expression pensive. "I won't lie, I'm still scared, but I trust you." Kieran's gaze softened, and he placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch reassuring. "And I trust you. Together, we'll face whatever comes next." Mira nodded, her resolve solidifying. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew they would face them as one. The bond forged by Genesis was more than just a connection. It was a promise, a partnership that would shape their futures in ways neither could yet foresee. As the last rays of sunlight dipped below the horizon, the cove was bathed in twilight. Mira and Kieran sat in companionable silence, their bond growing stronger with each passing moment. The journey ahead would be fraught with challenges, but for the first time, Mira felt ready to embrace the unknown. The night was still, the only sound the gentle lapping of waves against the shore. Mira lay on a blanket Kieran had spread out on the sand, the warmth of the fire beside them casting flickering shadows across their faces. She stared up at the stars, their brilliance more vivid than she had ever seen. The weight of the day settled over her, but there was a strange peace in the quiet, a sense of safety she hadn't expected. Kieran sat beside her, his presence as steady and grounding as the earth itself. His eyes, reflecting the firelight, seemed lost in thought. Mira watched him for a moment, her curiosity piqued. He had been so composed throughout the day, guiding her with patience and care, but there was an unspoken tension in him, a burden she could sense but not yet understand. "Do you ever miss your world?" she asked softly, breaking the silence. Kieran's gaze shifted to her, his expression unreadable at first. Then slowly he nodded. "Ido. The wild realm is my home, and being here, it feels different. Quieter." He paused, his eyes distant. "But I also know why I'm here. Why we're here." Mira propped herself up on one elbow, intrigued. "What do you mean?" Kieran leaned back, his hands resting on his knees. Genesis wasn't just created to forge bonds. It was meant to bridge the gap between our species, to find a way for both worlds to coexist. For centuries, our people have lived apart, but we've always known that survival depends on unity. Mira considered his words, the weight of their shared responsibility settling over her. And now we're the ones who have to figure out if that's possible. Kieran's lips curved into a faint smile. "Exactly. For a while. They sat in companionable silence, the fire crackling softly between them. Mira felt the pull of sleep tugging at her, but she fought it, unwilling to let the moment slip away. She turned her attention back to Kieran, studying him more closely. His strength was evident in every line of his body, but there was also a quiet grace to him, a calm that belied the power he wielded. "You said trust is important," she murmured. "But how do we build that?" Kieran met her gaze, his eyes warm and steady. "By being honest with each other, by sharing our fears, our strengths, and our vulnerabilities." He hesitated, then added, "And by learning to rely on one another." Mira nodded, his words resonating with her. She thought back to the earlier exercises, the way their movements had synced, the unspoken understanding that had begun to form. It wasn't just about physical connection. It was about something deeper, something she couldn't yet put into words. As if sensing her thoughts, Kieran shifted closer, his presence both comforting and electrifying. "There's one more thing we can do to strengthen our bond," he said, his voice low. "It's a practice among my people, a way to share energy and attune to each other more deeply." Myra's heart skipped a beat, her curiosity mingling with a hint of nervous anticipation. "What does it involve?" Kieran reached out, his hand hovering just above hers. "It's about closeness. Physical, yes, but also emotional. It requires trust and openness." Mira swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. She had come this far, pushed herself beyond the boundaries of what she thought she could handle. And yet, the thought of taking another step, of deepening their connection in such an intimate way, filled her with both excitement and trepidation. "I trust you," she said softly, her voice steady despite the fluttering in her chest. Kieran's eyes softened, and he gently took her hand, his touch sending a warm, tingling sensation up her arm. He guided her to sit facing him, their knees nearly touching. The firelight bathed them in a golden glow, and for a moment, the world seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them. "Close your eyes," Kieran murmured, his voice like a soothing balm. Mira obeyed, her breathing slow and even. She felt Kieran's hands lightly rest on her shoulders, his touch firm but gentle. His warmth seeped into her, and she focused on the steady rhythm of his breath, matching her own to his. A sense of calm washed over her, and she felt the connection between them strengthen, becoming more tangible with each passing moment. Kieran's hands moved slowly, tracing the line of her arms before coming to rest just above her wrists. His touch was light, almost reverent, as if he were committing every inch of her to memory. Mira felt her skin tingle under his fingertips, her senses heightened in a way she had never experienced before. "Feel the energy between us," Kieran said, his voice a quiet rumble. "Let it flow freely." Mira focused on the sensation, the subtle current of warmth that seemed to pass between them. It was unlike anything she had ever felt, a connection that went beyond the physical, touching something deeper, more profound. She felt herself relax, surrendering to the bond that was forming. After a few moments, Kieran's hands moved again, this time cupping her face. Mira opened her eyes, her gaze meeting his. The intensity in his golden eyes took her breath away, and she felt an unspoken understanding pass between them. Slowly, he leaned in, his movements deliberate, giving her every chance to pull away. But Mira stayed rooted in place, her heart pounding in anticipation. When their lips met, the connection between them seemed to ignite, a surge of warmth spreading through her. The kiss was slow and deliberate, a dance of discovery as they explored the bond they shared. Kieran's hand slid to her waist, pulling her closer, and Mira responded in kind, her fingers tangling in his hair. The world around them seemed to fade, leaving only the firelight and the steady rhythm of their shared breath. When they finally pulled apart, Mira felt a sense of completeness, as if a missing piece of herself had finally fallen into place. Kieran rested his forehead against hers, his breathing slightly uneven. "You're stronger than you know," he whispered. Mira smiled, her heart swelling with a mixture of pride and affection. "And you're not as intimidating as you seem." Kieran chuckled, the sound low and rich. "Don't let that get around." They sat together by the fire, their bond stronger than ever. Mira knew the journey ahead would be challenging, but for the first time, she felt ready to face it. Together, they would uncover the true purpose of Genesis and what it meant for both their worlds. The days that followed were a blur of training, exploration, and discovery. Mira and Kieran fell into a rhythm, their shared purpose driving them closer with each passing moment. They practiced synchronizing their movements in the early hours of the morning, refining their bond with every exercise. Their connection had grown beyond mere instinct. It was now an unspoken language, a thread tying their fates together. But with that growth came tension, an undercurrent of something neither of them dared address directly. Mira could feel it in the way Kieran's eyes lingered a second too long, in the way his touch would sometimes hesitate, as if he were holding himself back. And she felt it within herself, a quiet yearning that had taken root, growing stronger with each shared glance and fleeting touch. Late one afternoon, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, Mira found herself alone on the cliffside. The sea breeze played with her hair, and she wrapped her arms around herself, lost in thought. Their bond was undeniable, but the implications of it weighed heavily on her. Kieran had spoken of trust and unity, yet there was a part of her that feared the consequences of surrendering fully to the connection they shared. The sound of footsteps behind her pulled Mira from her thoughts. She turned to see Kieran approaching, his expression unreadable. He stopped a few paces away, his golden eyes scanning her face. "You've been quiet today," he said softly, his voice carrying over the wind. Mira offered a faint smile. "Just thinking." Kieran nodded, his gaze unwavering. "About us." She hesitated, then nodded. "This bond, it's stronger than I expected. And it's only getting stronger." Kieran stepped closer, his presence grounding. That's the nature of Genesis. It draws out the best and worst of us, pushing us to confront what we fear most. Mira met his gaze, her heart pounding. "And what do you fear, Kieran?" For a moment, he was silent. Then he spoke, his voice low. "Losing control. Hurting you." His eyes softened, vulnerability flickering in their depths. The bond demands trust, but trust requires more than words. Mira felt a surge of empathy. She reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "You've done nothing but protect me since we met. If there's one thing I trust, it's you." Kieran's gaze dropped to her hand, his expression conflicted. "And yet, I can feel the tension between us. The bond grows stronger, but so does the pull. It's difficult to ignore." Myra's cheeks flushed, but she didn't look away. "You're not the only one who feels it." The admission hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Kieran's eyes met hers, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Then, slowly, he reached up, his hand gently cupping her face. His thumb traced a soft line along her cheek, and Mira leaned into the touch, her heart racing. "We don't have to fight this," Kieran murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Myra's breath hitched, but she nodded. "Then we won't." The distance between them vanished as Kieran closed the gap, his lips brushing against hers in a kiss that was both tender and full of unspoken promises. Myra's hands found their way to his shoulders, her fingers curling against the fabric of his tunic as she gave herself over to the moment. The connection between them flared to life, a surge of warmth that spread through her, grounding and exhilarating all at once. When they pulled apart, Kieran rested his forehead against hers, his breathing unsteady. "We'll take this one step at a time," he said, his voice steady despite the tension in his body. "No pressure, no expectations." Mira nodded, her resolve firm. Together. They spent the rest of the evening in quiet companionship, their bond strengthened by the unspoken agreement between them. The fire crackled softly as they sat side by side, the weight of their shared journey lighter than it had been before. But the peace was short-lived. The next morning, as they prepared for another day of training, a distant sound caught Kieran's attention. He straightened, his ears twitching as he listened intently. Mira watched him, concern growing. "What is it?" she asked. Kieran's expression darkened. "We're not alone." Before Mira could respond, the sound grew louder, voices, accompanied by the unmistakable rhythm of footsteps. A group was approaching, their presence a stark reminder that the world beyond their secluded cove was not so easily ignored. Kieran moved quickly, positioning himself between Mira and the approaching figures. His stance was tense, ready for whatever came next. As the figures emerged from the trees, Myra's heart sank. They were beastkin, their forms familiar yet imposing. The leader, a tall wolfkin with piercing amber eyes, stepped forward, his gaze fixed on Kieran. Kieran, the wolfkin said, his voice low and commanding. We've been looking for you. Kieran's jaw tightened. I know why you're here, Rylan. The wolfkin's eyes flicked to Mira, his expression unreadable. You formed a bond with a human. Do you realize what that means? Kieran's stance didn't waver. I'm aware. Rylan's gaze returned to Kieran, his tone sharp. Then you know the risks. This bond goes against everything our people stand for. If you continue down this path, you'll bring danger to both our worlds. Mira felt a chill run down her spine. She stepped forward, her voice steady despite her fear. We're trying to understand the bond, to find a way for our worlds to coexist. Isn't that what Genesis was meant for? Rylan's eyes narrowed. Genesis was meant to be a tool of last resort, not a bridge to defy the natural order. Kieran's growl was low, his frustration evident. And yet here we are. The tension between the two beastkin was palpable, the weight of their words pressing down on Mira. She knew the path ahead would not be easy, but she also knew they couldn't turn back now. Rylan's expression softened slightly, but his tone remained firm. You're walking a dangerous path, Kieran. I hope you're prepared for the consequences. With that, he turned, leading his group back into the forest. Kieran watched them go, his shoulders tense. Mira stepped closer, placing a hand on his arm. What now? Kieran's gaze remained fixed on the tree-line. We keep moving forward. No matter what. Mira nodded, determination hardening her resolve. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, their bond unshakable. The sun hung low in the sky as Kieran led Mira through the dense forest, their path winding toward the hidden portal to the wild realm. The weight of Rylan's warning lingered between them, unspoken but ever-present. Mira could feel the tension radiating from Kieran, his usually calm demeanor now shadowed by a storm of thoughts. Neither of them had spoken much since the confrontation, each lost in their own reflections. Myra's mind churned with questions. What awaited them in Kieran's world? Would they find answers there, or only more obstacles? She knew the bond they shared was unconventional, but she hadn't fully grasped how deeply it challenged the norms of both their societies until now. Kieran's hand brushed hers as they walked, a fleeting touch that grounded her amidst the swirl of uncertainty. She glanced up at him, and for a moment, his eyes softened, offering a silent reassurance that they were in this together. The forest opened up to a secluded glade, its center dominated by a towering stone arch covered in ancient runes. The air around it shimmered faintly, a testament to the power that lay within. Kieran stopped just before the arch, turning to face Mira. This portal will take us to the wild realm, he said, his voice steady despite the gravity of his words. Once we cross, there's no turning back until we've completed what Genesis demands. Mira nodded, her resolve firm. I'm ready. Kieran studied her for a moment longer, as if committing her determination to memory. Then he extended his hand, and she took it without hesitation. Together, they stepped through the portal. The sensation was instantaneous, a rush of energy that tugged at Myra's very essence, pulling her forward through a tunnel of light and sound. When they emerged on the other side, the wild realm unfolded before her, a breathtaking expanse of vibrant colors and untamed beauty. Towering trees with leaves that shimmered like precious metals stretched toward the sky, their branches interwoven to form a natural canopy. The ground beneath their feet was soft and mossy, dotted with luminescent flowers that glowed faintly in the fading twilight. A gentle breeze carried the scent of earth and wild blossoms, and in the distance, the sound of a rushing river added a soothing rhythm to the surreal landscape. Mira took a step forward, her breath catching as she took it all in. It's beautiful. Kieran's gaze remained fixed on her, a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips. It's home. They began to walk again, Kieran leading Mira along a winding path that seemed to shift and change with each step. The wild realm pulsed with life, every sound and movement amplified by the primal energy that filled the air. Mira could feel it thrumming through her, a strange yet exhilarating sensation that made her skin tingle. As they continued, the path led them to a large clearing where a crystalline pool sparkled under the light of twin moons. Kieran stopped at the edge of the water, his expression thoughtful. "This is a sacred place," he said, his voice reverent. "It's where our kind come to reflect, to seek clarity and strength." Mira knelt beside the pool, trailing her fingers through the cool water. "What do we need to do here?" Kieran joined her, his gaze focused on the rippling surface. "The bond we share is unique, but it's still fragile. The wild realm will test us, pushing us to confront our fears and desires. If we are to understand the full extent of Genesis, we must be willing to face those challenges together." Mira nodded, her heart steady despite the uncertainty. She trusted Kieran, and that trust gave her the courage to face whatever lay ahead. Without warning, the air around them shifted. The once still water began to ripple more intensely, the reflections of the moons distorting into swirling patterns. Mira felt a pull deep within her, an invisible force urging her to step into the pool. She glanced at Kieran, who gave a small nod of encouragement. Taking a deep breath, she stepped into the water, its cool embrace sending a shiver up her spine. Kieran followed, his presence a steady anchor as they waded deeper. The water only came up to their waists, but its depth seemed infinite, the energy within it humming against their skin. As they stood in the center of the pool, a sudden wave of warmth washed over Mira, and the world around them seemed to fade. She closed her eyes, letting the sensation guide her. Memories and emotions rose to the surface, moments of doubt, fear, and longing that she had buried deep within herself. She felt vulnerable, exposed, but also oddly comforted by Kieran's presence beside her. "Mira," Kieran's voice was gentle, yet it carried a weight that drew her attention. She opened her eyes to find him watching her, his expression unreadable. "What do you see?" She hesitated, searching for the right words. "I see everything I've been afraid of. Losing control, losing myself, but also the hope of something more." Kieran reached out, his hand resting lightly on her cheek. "You're stronger than your fears. The bond we share is built on that strength." Myra's gaze locked onto his, and she felt a surge of warmth that had nothing to do with the pool's energy. She closed the distance between them, their lips meeting in a kiss that was both grounding and electrifying. It wasn't just about desire, it was a reaffirmation of their commitment to each other, a promise to face the challenges ahead as one. When they finally pulled apart, the energy in the pool began to calm, the ripples subsiding until the water was once again still. Mira felt a sense of clarity, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Kieran offered her a hand, and together they stepped out of the pool. The night air was cool against their damp skin, but the warmth of their bond remained, a steady flame that would guide them through whatever trials the wild realm had in store. As they stood at the edge of the clearing, the sound of distant footsteps reached their ears. Kieran's expression hardened, his instincts on high alert. "They're coming," he said, his voice low. Mira nodded, her resolve unwavering. "Then let's be ready." Together, they turned to face the path ahead, their bond unshakable as the challenges of the wild realm loomed on the horizon. The air in the wild realm was heavy with tension as Mira and Kieran moved swiftly through the dense forest, their senses heightened. The sound of footsteps grew louder behind them, accompanied by the low hum of voices. Myra's heart raced, but she kept pace with Kieran, her trust in him unwavering. They emerged into a narrow ravine, the towering cliffs on either side casting long shadows. Kieran slowed, his eyes scanning the terrain for any sign of their pursuers. His hand rested lightly on Myra's arm, a silent gesture of reassurance. "We're close to a safe point," he said quietly, "but we need to move carefully. They won't stop until they've caught up. Mira nodded, her grip tightening on the small pack she carried. The weight of their situation pressed down on her, but she pushed the fear aside. They had faced challenges before, and they would face this one together. As they navigated the rocky path, the voices behind them grew more distinct. Mira could make out snippets of conversation, warnings, commands, and the occasional growl. The beastkin were relentless, their determination fueled by the threat Kieran and Myra's bond posed to the delicate balance between their worlds. Kieran's pace quickened, and Mira followed without hesitation. They rounded a bend in the ravine, and Kieran suddenly stopped, his hand raised in a silent signal. Mira froze, her eyes darting around for any sign of danger. Ahead of them, the path opened into a wide clearing, its center dominated by an ancient stone altar. The air around it shimmered faintly, similar to the portal they had passed through earlier. Kieran's expression shifted, a mix of relief and urgency. "This is a sanctuary," he said, his voice low. "The energy here will protect us for a time, but we'll need to perform a rite to activate its full power." Mira stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the altar. "What kind of rite?" Kieran's gaze softened as he turned to face her. "A bonding rite. It's meant to strengthen our connection and shield us from outside forces." Mira swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. She could feel the weight of his words, the significance of what they were about to do. The bond between them had already grown stronger, but this rite would solidify it in a way that couldn't be undone. "I trust you," she said softly, meeting his gaze. "Let's do it." Kieran nodded, his expression resolute. He led her to the altar, their movements purposeful and synchronized. As they approached, the air around them seemed to hum with energy, the ancient power of the sanctuary awakening in response to their presence. Kieran placed his hands on the smooth stone surface of the altar, his eyes closing as he began to chant in a language Mira couldn't understand. The sound of his voice was low and melodic, carrying a weight that resonated deep within her. Mira followed his lead, placing her hands on the altar beside his. The moment her palms touched the stone, a surge of warmth coursed through her, connecting her to Kieran and the sanctuary itself. She closed her eyes, letting the energy flow freely between them. The chant grew louder, the rhythm of Kieran's voice guiding the energy around them. Mira felt a pull deep within her, a sense of unity that transcended the physical. Their bond was more than a connection of minds and bodies. It was a merging of their very essences, a fusion of two souls brought together by fate. As the rite continued, Mira became acutely aware of Kieran's presence. She could feel the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, the warmth of his energy enveloping her like a protective cocoon. His hand brushed against hers, and she opened her eyes to find him watching her, his expression both fierce and tender. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mira nodded, her resolve firm. "I'm with you." Kieran leaned in, their foreheads touching as the energy around them reached its peak. The air crackled with power, the shimmering light of the sanctuary enveloping them in a protective barrier. Mira felt a sense of weightlessness, as if they were suspended in a moment outside of time. Their connection deepened, the bond between them solidifying in a way that was both exhilarating and humbling. Mira could feel Kieran's emotions as clearly as her own, his determination, his protectiveness, and the unspoken depth of his feelings for her. When the rite finally came to an end, the energy around them began to settle, the shimmering light fading into a soft glow. Kieran stepped back, his hands still lightly resting on Myra's arms. "It's done," he said quietly. "The sanctuary will protect us now." Mira nodded, her heart still racing from the intensity of the experience. She felt stronger, more connected to Kieran than ever before. The bond they shared was no longer just a tool. It was a lifeline, a source of strength that would guide them through the challenges ahead. The sound of footsteps approaching the clearing brought them back to the present. Kieran's expression hardened, his protective instincts kicking in. "They're here," he said, his voice tense. "Stay close." Mira followed him as they moved to the edge of the clearing, their eyes scanning the trailing. The beastkin emerged moments later, their leader stepping forward with a cautious but determined expression. Kieran, the wolfkin said, his tone measured. You've gone too far this time. Kieran squared his shoulders, his stance firm. I've done what I must to protect our bond. The wolfkin's eyes flicked to Mira, his expression unreadable. You're risking everything. Kieran's gaze didn't waver. Then so be it. The tension in the clearing was palpable, the air thick with unspoken challenges. Mira stood beside Kieran, her resolve unwavering. Together, they had faced the trials of the wild realm, and together they would face whatever came next. The tension in the clearing was suffocating, the air thick with the weight of unspoken threats. Kieran stood tall, his body tense but composed, ready to defend the bond he and Mira had forged. Beside him, Mira could feel the steady pulse of their connection, a lifeline of warmth and strength grounding her amidst the uncertainty. The wolfkin leader, Rylan, stepped closer, his sharp amber eyes narrowing as he assessed the pair. His presence was commanding, every movement deliberate as he kept his warriors at bay with a subtle hand gesture. The other beastkin flanked him, their postures wary, their eyes flickering between Kieran and Mira with a mixture of curiosity and caution. You've defied our laws, Kieran, Rylan said, his voice low but carrying the weight of authority. A bond between beastkin and human has never been meant to exist. You know the risks you've brought upon us all. Kieran's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. I know what's at stake, but this bond is different. It's not just about us. It's about survival, about finding a way for our worlds to coexist. Genesis chose Mira, and I trust that choice. Rylan's gaze shifted to Mira, his expression unreadable. And you, human? Do you understand what this bond means? The danger it brings? Mira met his gaze, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. Ido, and I'm willing to face whatever comes because of it. Kieran and I didn't choose this bond lightly, but we've accepted it. Together. A flicker of something, respect, perhaps, crossed Rylan's face, but it was gone in an instant. He turned back to Kieran, his tone hardening. Even if you believe in this bond, the council won't. They'll see it as a threat, an imbalance that must be corrected. You'll be hunted, exiled. Kieran's eyes narrowed. Let them try. I won't abandon Mira, and I won't let fear dictate our future. The silence that followed was heavy, the only sound the distant rustle of leaves in the wind. The beastkin warriors exchanged uneasy glances, their confidence wavering in the face of Kieran's resolve. Rylan seemed to weigh his options, his expression torn between duty and something deeper. Finally, he let out a slow breath, his shoulders relaxing slightly. You've always been stubborn, he muttered. Perhaps it's what makes you a leader. Kieran didn't respond, his focus unyielding. Rylan stepped back, his gaze sweeping over the gathered warriors. Stand down, he ordered, his voice firm. For now. The warriors hesitated but obeyed, their weapons lowering as the tension in the clearing began to ease. Rylan's eyes returned to Kieran, his expression grave. This doesn't mean you're safe. The council will still demand answers, and they won't be as understanding. Kieran gave a curt nod. I'll face them when the time comes. With that, Rylan turned and began to retreat, his warriors following in silence. Mira watched them go, her heart pounding with a mixture of relief and lingering apprehension. When the last of the beastkin disappeared into the trees, she let out a shaky breath, her shoulders sagging. Kieran placed a reassuring hand on her back, his touch grounding. You were brave, he said quietly. They saw that. Mira looked up at him, her eyes searching his. Do you really think we can convince the council? Kieran's expression softened, a hint of a smile tugging at his lips. I don't know, but what I do know is that we're stronger together. No matter what happens, we'll face it as one. Mira nodded, finding strength in his words. She leaned into him, their bond a steady pulse of warmth and connection. For a moment, the weight of their situation felt lighter, their shared resolve a beacon against the uncertainty ahead. As night fell, they made their way back to the sanctuary, the protective energy of the ancient site offering a brief reprieve. The air was cooler now, the light of the twin moons casting a silvery glow over the clearing. Kieran stoked the fire, its warmth chasing away the chill as they settled in for the night. Mira sat close to him, their shoulders brushing. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with the unspoken understanding that had grown between them. She could feel the steady thrum of their connection, a reminder of the bond that had brought them together and the strength it gave them. Kieran turned to her, his golden eyes reflecting the firelight. "The council will test us," he said, his voice quiet but resolute. "They'll try to break our bond, to prove it's unnatural." Mira met his gaze, her hand finding his. "Then we'll prove them wrong. We've come this far, and I'm not giving up now." A faint smile touched Kieran's lips, and he gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "Neither am I." They sat in silence for a while longer, the fire crackling softly as the night deepened. The challenges ahead were daunting, but for the first time in days, Mira felt a sense of calm. Whatever trials awaited them, she knew they would face them together, their bond unbreakable. As the fire burned low, Kieran shifted, his hand coming to rest lightly on Myra's shoulder. She turned to him, her breath catching at the intensity in his gaze. He leaned in, his movements slow and deliberate, giving her every chance to pull away. But Mira didn't move, her heart pounding as their lips met in a kiss that was both tender and full of unspoken promises. The warmth of the fire paled in comparison to the heat that spread through her, their connection deepening with every moment. Kieran's hand trailed down her arm, his touch sending a shiver through her. Myra's fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer as she surrendered to the bond that had brought them together. When they finally pulled apart, Kieran rested his forehead against hers, his breathing unsteady. "We'll get through this," he murmured. "Together." Mira smiled, her heart full. Together. The night stretched on, the fire burning low as they held each other close. The challenges ahead were many, but Mira knew that with Kieran by her side, they could face anything. Their bond was their strength, and nothing could break it. The wild realm stirred with an unusual stillness as Mira and Kieran approached the council's domain. Towering spires of ancient stone rose from the earth, their surfaces etched with glowing runes. The air here was thick with an almost tangible energy, the very ground humming beneath their feet. It was a place of power, of judgment, and Mira could feel its weight pressing down on her with every step. Kieran's hand rested lightly on her lower back as they ascended the final incline, his touch a steadying force. "Stay close," he murmured, his voice low but firm. "The council will seek to intimidate, but we stand as one." Mira nodded, her resolve solidifying despite the nerves knotting her stomach. She could sense the importance of this moment, the culmination of their journey thus far. The council held the authority to either sanction their bond or tear it apart, and Mira knew they would need to be stronger than ever to face what lay ahead. As they entered the central chamber, the temperature seemed to drop, the faint glow of the runes casting eerie patterns on the walls. The council members were already assembled, their forms imposing and regal. Each beastkin elder bore the distinct marks of their lineage, the sharp antlers of the elkkin, the sleek fur of the pantherkin, the scaled features of the drakekin. At their center sat the High Elder, an ancient foxkin whose piercing eyes seemed to see straight into Myra's soul. "Kieran," the High Elder began, his voice like the crackle of distant fire, "you returned to us under unusual circumstances." Kieran inclined his head respectfully. "High Elder Lyrian, I come before you with a bond that challenges our traditions but holds the potential to reshape our future." The High Elder's gaze shifted to Mira, his expression unreadable. "And the human? Does she understand the gravity of what she has entered into?" Mira stepped forward, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "Ego elde. Kieran and I share a bond forged by Genesis, one that has strengthened through trials and trust. I believe it's a bond that can bring our worlds together." The chamber filled with murmurs as the council members exchanged glances. The pantherkin elder leaned forward, his golden eyes narrowing. "You speak of unity, but do you understand the risk? Our histories are fraught with conflict. Such a bond could destabilize the balance we've maintained for centuries. Mira held her ground, her gaze unwavering. I understand the risk, but I also see the potential. Kieran and I didn't seek this bond. It was chosen for us. And we've proven its strength through every challenge we've faced. Kieran stepped beside her, his presence commanding. The bond is not a weakness. It's a testament to what can be achieved when trust and respect bridge the divide between our kinds. The High Elder studied them in silence, his sharp gaze flickering between Kieran and Mira. Finally, he raised a hand, and the chamber fell quiet. Genesis is a relic of ancient times, he said, his tone contemplative. It was created to forge bonds in the face of extinction, a tool to ensure survival through unity. Yet it has not been invoked in generations. This bond between you defies precedent, but it also carries the weight of destiny. He rose from his seat, his movements deliberate. The council will test this bond. If it holds, you may yet prove that our worlds can coexist in harmony. If it falters, you will bear the consequences. Kieran nodded solemnly. We are ready. The High Elder gestured toward a smaller chamber beyond the main hall. The rite of unity will determine your fate. Step forward and prove the strength of your bond. Mira felt a surge of anxiety, but drew strength from Kieran's steady presence beside her. Together, they followed the High Elder into the adjoining chamber, a circular space bathed in a soft, golden light. The air was warmer here, the energy more focused. At the center of the room stood a pedestal, upon which rested two interwoven crystal orbs. The High Elder motioned for them to approach. These orbs will respond to the purity of your bond, he explained. You must channel your connection, your trust, and your shared purpose. If your bond is true, the orbs will merge into one, symbolizing unity. If not, he didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. Mira exchanged a glance with Kieran, her heart pounding. They stepped forward, each placing a hand on the orbs. The moment their skin made contact, a pulse of warmth spread through Mira, the familiar sensation of their bond igniting. Focus on me, Kieran said softly, his eyes locking onto hers. Mira nodded, closing her eyes as she let the connection between them guide her. She could feel Kieran's presence within her, a steady, comforting force that bolstered her confidence. Their bond pulsed in rhythm, a shared heartbeat that resonated with the energy of the orbs. The light within the orbs began to shift, their separate glows intertwining. Mira felt a surge of emotion, trust, strength, and an unspoken love that had grown between them. She opened her eyes to see the orbs glowing brighter, their forms beginning to merge. The chamber filled with a soft hum as the orbs fused into one, their light steady and strong. The High Elder watched in silence, his expression thoughtful. When the light finally subsided, the single orb remained, its surface smooth and radiant. The High Elder stepped forward, his eyes reflecting the glow of the orb. The bond holds, he said quietly. You have proven its strength. Relief washed over Mira, and she felt Kieran's hand tighten around hers. They had passed the test, their bond unshaken despite the challenges. The High Elder turned to face the council, who had gathered at the chamber's entrance. This bond represents a new path, one that carries great risk, but also great potential. We will observe and guide, but for now, they have our blessing. Myra's heart swelled with gratitude and hope. She and Kieran had defied the odds, their connection a beacon of possibility for both their worlds. As they left the chamber, the weight of their journey lifted slightly, replaced by a newfound sense of purpose. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. The journey back to the sanctuary was quiet, the weight of what they had just accomplished settling over them. The council's blessing had been hard-won, a testament to the bond Mira and Kieran had forged through trust and perseverance. Yet, the path ahead remained uncertain. The rite of unity had proven their connection, but the delicate balance between their worlds still hung in the air, fragile and unresolved. As they walked side by side, the forest seemed to hum with life, the wild realm embracing them as if in acknowledgement of their success. Mira glanced at Kieran, his expression stoic, but softened by a hint of relief. She could feel his energy through their bond, a steady current of warmth and reassurance. I didn't think it would feel like this, Mira said quietly, breaking the silence. Kieran raised an eyebrow, his golden eyes flicking toward her. Like what? Lighter, she admitted. Like we've been carrying this weight for so long, and now it's not gone, but it's bearable. Kieran gave a small, approving nod. We've faced the worst of it. Together, we've proven ourselves. That's no small feat. Mira smiled, her heart swelling at his words. Despite the challenges they had faced, she felt stronger than ever. Their bond wasn't just a connection. It was a source of strength, a foundation on which they could build a future. When they reached the sanctuary, the evening light bathed the clearing in a soft, golden glow. The fire from the previous night had long since burned out, but the warmth of their shared victory lingered. Kieran set to work rekindling the flames, his movements fluid and purposeful. Mira watched him for a moment, her thoughts drifting to everything they had endured to reach this point. As the fire crackled to life, Kieran straightened, his gaze meeting hers. We've come a long way, he said, his voice low but filled with quiet pride. Mira stepped closer, her fingers brushing against his. And we'll keep going. This is just the beginning. Kieran's hand closed around hers, his touch firm yet gentle. He pulled her closer, their bodies separated only by the barest of space. No matter what comes next, he murmured, his eyes never leaving hers, I'll stand by your side. Mira felt her breath hitch, the intensity of his gaze igniting a warmth that spread through her. And I'll stand by yours, she replied softly. Kieran's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb tracing a gentle path along her skin. He leaned in, their foreheads touching as the world around them seemed to fade away. Mira closed her eyes, letting the steady rhythm of his breathing anchor her. When their lips met, it was slow and deliberate, a deepening of the bond they had fought so hard to protect. Myra's hands found their way to Kieran's shoulders, her fingers curling against the fabric of his tunic. His arms wrapped around her, holding her close as the kiss deepened, their connection pulsing with a shared sense of purpose and belonging. As they pulled apart, Kieran rested his forehead against hers, his voice a low whisper. We've already defied the odds. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. Mira nodded, her heart full. Together. The fire crackled softly, casting a warm glow over the clearing as the night deepened. Mira and Kieran sat side by side, their hands intertwined as they looked out into the forest. The challenges ahead were daunting, but for the first time, Mira felt ready to face them. Kieran broke the silence, his tone thoughtful. The council's blessing is a step forward, but it's only the beginning. There will be others who resist, who see our bond as a threat. Mira squeezed his hand, her resolve unwavering. Then we'll show them what's possible. We'll prove that unity is stronger than fear. Kieran smiled, a rare softness in his expression. You've grown so much, Mira. From the moment we met, I knew you were strong. But now, you've become someone truly remarkable. Mira felt a flush of warmth at his words, but she shook her head with a small laugh. I couldn't have done it without you. You've been my anchor through all of this. They sat in companionable silence for a while longer, the bond between them a steady presence that needed no words. As the stars began to hit the sky, Mira leaned her head against Kieran's shoulder, her heart at peace despite the uncertainty of the future. I wonder what's next for us, she mused quietly. Kieran's hand traced gentle circles on her back, his voice steady. Whatever it is, we'll face it head on. This bond has shown us that together, we're capable of more than we ever imagined. Mira closed her eyes, the steady rhythm of his touch lulling her into a state of calm. She knew he was right. They had already overcome so much, their connection proving time and again that it was unbreakable. No matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them as one. As the fire burned low, the night stretched out before them, filled with a quiet promise of new beginnings. Mira and Kieran remained close, their bond a steady light in the darkness. Together, They had defied the odds, and together, they would forge a path toward a future where unity and trust could thrive. Whatever the future held, Mira knew they were ready. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt truly at home.